It seems appropriate on this 4th of July Independence Day weekend to talk about guns. And I'm not going to talk about my thoughts about gun laws or my experience with gun violence as someone who worked on the trauma floor at a level 1 trauma center or worked ER at a level 1 trauma center. I'm not going to talk about statistics or children or school shootings. What I'm going to talk about today is the attitude about guns that I was brought up with as a child in a evangelical home. And we hear a lot of talk about guns and Christian nationalism, and I think that my parents were very much Christian nationalists, but they were a flavor of Christian nationalists that really has never received a label. And it's Southern Christian nationalists, which means that they held most of the beliefs that Christian nationalists do, but with a twist because they thought that the South was right. And so while this was a country founded on Christian principles and God helped create this country, essentially, they also thought that the government had corrupted its God-given purpose and they were evil and not to be trusted. And we had to support good Christians coming into positions of power so that we could be a Christian nation and follow God in that way. Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. I grew up around guns. I honestly don't ever remember a time where there weren't guns around. My dad always carried a .357 revolver in our family car, and I think I was like 6, maybe 5, the first time that I touched it. And I remember getting in big trouble because I was supposed to be sitting up front because we had somebody extra riding with us. We had a Plymouth Acclaim, and I was clearing out the middle seat in the front, and I didn't realize that the gun was there and not in the glove compartment where it usually was. And I was just pulling stuff out quickly and moving it out of the way, and I grabbed the holster and pulled it out, and there it was. And I got in so much trouble for touching it because we weren't supposed to touch guns. That was like a whole big thing. We weren't supposed to touch guns. So I remember that like very deeply ingrained into me. You don't touch guns. Guns are not for you to touch. To the point that when I was old enough and we started getting in shooting sports with 4-H and stuff, I had so much anxiety every time I touched a gun because I felt like I wasn't supposed to be touching it. But my parents very much believed that it was their God-given right to own a gun. Like, they were hardcore, like, Second Amendment is straight from the mouth of God. It was practically written by the hand of Jesus. It's your God-given right to own a gun. Even Jesus talked about owning a sword somehow. Those are equated because it's a weapon and it's a way to defend yourself. And my dad hunted when he was younger. He claimed to hunt as he got older, but he didn't, ever. He would say that he did, but he would just, like, go sit in our yard with a gun and drink his coffee and call that hunting. Shockingly, he never bagged anything that way. But it's really interesting to me how often I hear the argument that certain guns are like for deer hunting or whatever. And I would challenge anyone who is or knows a deer hunter to come talk to me and tell me that you're going to use an AR-15 or AK-47 while deer hunting. You can say it's not an assault rifle all day long, but I know why people own those. I grew up hearing people talk about why they own those and their reasoning for owning them, and every single one of them wanted one to kill people. Potentially. Not necessarily aggressively go out and murder people, but they wanted them in the chance that the government became too tyrannical and sent out armies among the people to, arrest Christians or arrest conservatives or arrest homeschoolers or whatever conspiracy that they had going in their head on that particular month that was a reason that they were going to be genocided by the government. Or in the event of some apocalyptic event, when mass hysteria occurred and people became crazy for survival and violent. There is not a person who owns one of those just because they want to go deer hunting. And if they are, I have questions. Because I know what deer rifles are. And it ain't those. But they will always have this visceral reaction to hearing them called assault rifles. That's not what they are. That's not what they're for. That's just the media's labels. Okay, tell me what you're going to use it for then. Tell me why you want it. Because there is something very ironic about a religion that focuses on not being afraid. And they talk about this all the time. Be not afraid. Don't be afraid. God's on our side. God's gonna win. And living in constant fear that you're going to be a military target. Which I think is also a big reason why they so want to take over the government and make sure that laws are Christian laws. Because in their mind, if they control the government, then they're not going to be genocided. And the fact that they think that anyone not following their religion deserves death is just a huge point of irony in the whole scenario. Most of the extremists in this belief system do very much believe that anyone in the LGBTQ plus community should be killed, that they should suffer the death penalty by the government. And I think it really boils down to they want that feeling of power and control and superiority. If I have enough firepower, it doesn't matter what your opinion is or what you want to make me do. And it goes back to a lot of those patriarchal belief systems of might makes right. And I'm bigger, I'm older, so I have the authority, you have to listen to me. Well, if you're not bigger or older, but you have the ability to kill someone without them being able to really do anything about it, you definitely have the upper hand. And that's really all they want, is the upper hand. They'll preach from the pulpit that we're supposed to be different, we're supposed to be set apart, we're supposed to be out of the world, we're not supposed to be the majority. We're never going to be the majority. It says it in the Bible. It's few there be that find the straight path. But the way that they live is the opposite of that. It is trying to convince everyone that they're right and get everyone on their side, or at least make everyone bow to their will. Hypocrisy is the price that vice pays to virtue. I grew up hearing that. And it was said in the context of, if Christians are asserting their authority, control, whatever, over the world, then people feel like they have to live up to their standards. And as much as they think they're not doing that, they very much are. When I was in the church, I believed wholeheartedly that if I spoke up about my beliefs and my religion out in the world, that I would be persecuted, I would be shamed, people would, make fun of me, it might cause me problems in my job. And every time that I spoke up, I found that people responded really well to it, that it was this like universal connector. Coming out of the church and not having that mentality of everyone's going to be out to get me because of my beliefs, I have found that my beliefs are so much more unacceptable now that they're not Christian, to the point that I have concern for people finding out who I really am and what I really believe in my job, because I work with a bunch of Christians, and boy do they not like that I'm not one. And I think part of that is that I'm living in the Bible Belt. It's called that for a reason. But I don't think that it is reasonable to categorize Christians as an oppressed minority. They have more influence in this country than any other religion or belief system. Period, full stop. Why do I say that? Okay, let's look at a Democrat running for office. And I'm saying a Democrat because if a Republican runs for office, it is automatically assumed they're supposed to be Christian and conservative, and people are going to hold them to that standards. Okay, a Democrat runs for office. Somebody brings out some kind of sex scandal against them. Look, they were wild in college. Look at all this shit they did. Who cares what they did in college, first of all? And why do sexual escapades of a college student dictate character? And why would sexual escapades of anyone dictate a character as far as running for office? Why? Because Christians assert their authority. I say authority, I'm using it in the evangelical sense of we rule the world because our Father is the creator of the world. And so we're going to assert our influence. I guess influence would be a better word. Who cares about people's sex lives? Christians are fucking obsessed with people's sex lives in a pathological way. They care so much about what consenting adults do in the privacy of their own homes, such that it is just a pathological perversion. No one should care that much about what other people do in their bedrooms. It is voyeuristic. And this is why when people in the church either get out of it or become rebellious within the church and just, kind of go off the deep end, they always fall straight into some really kinky shit. Because they are so trained to be voyeuristic and caring about what other people do. There is no normal sex life. And I say normal, I don't mean any kink or whatever is not normal, but there's no vanilla there, because they've already lived their entire lives without that. Their entire lives have been based around worrying what other people are doing in their bedroom and thinking about what other people are doing in their bedroom. Like, there is so much obsessive thought about that. We really got off topic from guns. Hi, I'm Naomi and I have ADHD. Anyway, my point is that Christians will assert their influence even in circles that you would not think they would have influence in. And that is fully their goal. If you find an evangelical Christian who does not ascribe to premillennialist doctrine, and if you don't know what that is, it's fine. Premillennialist doctrine takes a somewhat literal interpretation of the book of Revelation, whereas non-premillennialists take it as more of a figurative or allegorical type of writing, and that all of the symbolism is not literal. It is meant to represent other things. I was brought up that Revelation is a book that uses figurative language. It is written in the apocalyptic style of writing and basically represents the battle between Christianity / God's people / army and government controlled by Satan. I'm not saying I believe that. That's how I was brought up. And the people who take that viewpoint and that belief system will argue that the government is the enemy of Christians because it is run by Satan. Ironically, a lot of these people also think that they need to infiltrate the government to protect Christianity, other Christians. It's a really weird, circuitous kind of argument. And a lot of it stems from the movement that happened in, I would say, the 1980s, really, with purity culture, and Amazon Prime has a new documentary out, Shiny Happy People, and talks about the Duggars and the, IBLP, and homeschooling, and it was this huge movement within the church of this, like, super fundamentalist, really misogynistic interpretation of the Bible, just subjugating women and abusing women and children, and just the mainstreaming of the idea that you should abuse your wife and children. That's what God wants you to do. And with that movement came the bolstering because of Waco and Ruby Ridge. And I'm not going to get into all that happened in Waco and Ruby Ridge. You can Google it, and I think I've talked about it on previous episodes, but the evangelical homeschool movement used Waco and Ruby Ridge as their fucking martyrs. Look, see what happens when the government doesn't like you following God and trying to do what's right by your conscience. You see what happens when the government doesn't like you having guns. It all boiled down to that. And because both of those instances were kind of the catalyst to them happening, had to do with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and it was related to firearms. It just solidified their belief that you gotta have guns because the government's gonna send a fucking army to your doorstep to take away your children and kill you because they don't want you following God. That is the narrative that I grew up with. I do not have a memory before the memory of Homeschool Legal Defense's phone number stickers being on the back of every phone in our house and being told that if the police, the government, whoever shows up at our door, you immediately go to the phone and you call that number and you hand the phone out to them and say, talk to our lawyers. I also grew up with the understanding that if that situation occurred and things turned violent, my parents would fight to the death. And they would make sure that me and my sisters were also dead. Because they said repeatedly they would rather see us dead than in the hands of the government. Which goes back to the mentality that you have to brainwash your kids from the earliest age with everything to do with the Bible. Otherwise, the devil will latch hold of them. The devil wants your kids, and there's this mentality that if you don't teach them from the earliest age, they'll be lost, and it will be almost impossible for them to be saved. And that's why families like this homeschool. They don't want their children, as they put it, indoctrinated and brainwashed by the government to know about things like evolution or, critical race theory or whatever. That they want their children to have their version of reality, to be brought up with their version of reality and belief system entirely, and not be exposed to anything else except as it is couched within the terms of this is what other people believe, but it's wrong. And that's how homeschool evangelical families teach their children. It's the Bible. It's the most important thing. Everything is taught within the context of the Bible. And I do mean everything from math to history to science, language arts, social studies, everything. And if it is something that is deemed too far outside of biblical truth or not something that can be learned from or is too inappropriate for whatever age your children are, you just don't get taught it. I never learned about the Greek gods. Ever. That's like a really standard, part of history and social studies and things like that. I knew that they existed. I didn't know who they were or anything surrounding that except that it was evil, heathen, pagan worship that was not rooted in truth. There is a lot that I missed out on. The only thing I ever learned about evolution was that it was wrong, and that people believe that man came from monkeys, and that there was an explosion at some point that did not have a cause, and it started popping out everything that exists in the world today. That was the entirety of what I knew about evolution, except how to argue against it. There was a whole lot of teaching about how to argue against evolution and how to take it down scientifically. Not just, well, the Bible says it's true. There was a lot of teaching about how scientifically inaccurate evolution was. And everything in history, it all went back to, whether it was the fall of Rome or the Soviet Union or the American Civil War or the American Revolution, everything always got tied back into God and the Bible and how God deals with nations. And I remember being told that the reason that the South lost the war was because they quit putting their faith in God and they started putting their faith in their own guns and military skills. And that if they had continued to put their faith in God, they would have won the war. Seriously. Which is ironic because I don't know any the South will rise again Southerner who doesn't insist on keeping guns for the reason that the South will rise again, or the government might come. And if the government comes and tries to take your guns, they can have all the bullets first. That's what everyone says. And they try to push this narrative of, oh, it's just for my own personal protection. Oh, it's for hunting. Oh, it's a hobby. But it is 100%, every single one of them, for the purpose of killing people. The people who argue the need for assault rifles, and yes, that's what they are, argue about it all you want, they have them for the purpose of killing people. That is the only reason that they want them. And I'm tired of pretending like that's not the case, because I grew up around the people who wanted these guns and I heard their reasoning for it. And I'm not saying we should ban all guns or the government should come take away all guns. Again, I'm not talking about gun policy, but I think we need to be realistic when we're looking at our gun culture in this country. Because the reasoning behind it, the reason why everyone wants the guns that they have, is so that they can kill people. And it's a dangerous mentality. It is a toxic mentality, and it is a mentality that needs to be addressed. The guns are a symptom of the problem. The problem is that rather than living in a society and forming community, people view their neighbors and the authority of the country as potential violent enemies that might need to be eliminated with violence. I honestly don't know exactly where this mentality comes from, other than years of indoctrination and brainwashing and just fucked up thinking from a lot of people who needed therapy and raised people who continued to need therapy, and no one's got therapy. I do know that the way we combat this is to stop looking at everyone as a potential violent enemy. Which, as a woman, is very difficult to do because I am statistically more likely to be a victim of violent crime, particularly in domestic situations. But that doesn't mean that I can't make the change. Living in fear is a guaranteed way to make sure your life does not get any better or go anywhere beyond where it's at. If all of your decisions in life are based on a fear of something, your life will remain small. Your life will remain fearful. There is a huge difference between having a healthy respect and understanding for threats and living in fear. And I think this country, in a lot of ways, is built on living in fear. And the only way that we can change that is to change ourselves. And as we change ourselves, to bring that openness and that love out into the world, so that it's no longer a fear-based society, but one based on community and love and mutual support and sharing. This episode really ended up being a whole lot less about guns than I intended it for it to be originally, but I think that the tangents were somewhat necessary. Growing up in that fundamentalist evangelical Christian homeschool environment is so multi-layered and multifaceted in the levels of trauma, particularly emotional trauma and developmental trauma. And I think I find a new thing every day that I'm like, oh, there's a fresh new hell that I need to deal with. And this is why I keep talking about it, because I know this was not a small movement, and I know there are people out there who are also unpacking all of this shit. And I do hope that me talking about it, at the very least, helps you to feel less alone. Please join us for the next episode. Follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Mosaic in Progress. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Please follow us. Like, share, comment. I enjoy your feedback. And if you have an episode request, you can send it to mosaicinprogress@gmail.com. And I will see you on the next episode as we both continue to work on our Mosaic in Progress.